You are listening to Letters from a Father to His Daughter.
These letters were written by Jawaharlal Nehru to his daughter Indira from the confines of prison. I am your host Giriwala Joshi.
In the previous letter, we learned how different classes of people were formed. In today's letter,
Nehru stays on the same topic
and highlights how the priests and the kings became powerful and exploited the peasants and laborers. Letter 25, Kings and Temples and Priests. We saw in our last letter that 5 different classes were formed. The biggest class was those of the peasants and laborers. The peasants plowed the land and tilled the soil and grew the food. If the peasantry had not done so and no one else had worked on the land, there would have been no food. The laborers also did useful work on the land and in the towns. But although these people did such important work and were so necessary to everybody, they got very little out of it. Most of what they produced went to others, especially to the king and his class of people, including the nobles. The king and his class, as we have seen, had a great deal of power. During the days of the early tribes, the land belonged to the whole tribe and not to any one person. But as the king's class grew in power, they said that the land belonged to them. They became the landlords, and the peasants, who really did all the hard work on the land, became merely their servants in a way. Whatever the peasants produced from the land was divided, a big share going to the landlord. Some of the temples also had land and were thus landlords. Let us see what these temples and their priests were. In one of my letters to you, I said that the early savage men started thinking of God and religion because they did not understand many things and were afraid of what they did not understand. They made a god or goddess of everything, a river, a mountain, the sun, trees, animals, and things which they could not see but only imagined, like spirits. Because they were afraid, they always thought that their gods wanted to punish them. Their gods were, like themselves, harsh and cruel, and the people were always trying to appease them or please them by sacrifices. Temples grew up for these gods. Inside the temple there was a special room called a shrine or holy place, where there was an image of the god they worshipped. They could not worship something they could not see. This is a little difficult. You know that a little child can usually think of things it sees. The early people were like children somewhat. And as they could not worship without images, they put images in their temples. It is curious that these images were usually horribly ugly animals, or sometimes half animal and half man. In Egypt, they worshipped at one time a cat, and at another period, I think, a monkey. Why people should worship these awful images of animals, it is very difficult to understand. If an image is to be worshipped, why not make it beautiful? But perhaps the idea was that the gods were something to be afraid of, and so they were made into these terrible images. At that time, probably people did not think of one god or one great power, as most people think now. They imagined that there were a large number of gods and goddesses, sometimes even quarreling with each other. Different cities and different countries often had different gods to worship. The temples were full of priests and priestesses. Usually the priests knew reading and writing and were more learned than the others. They became therefore the advisers of the kings. The books in those days were written or copied by the priests. Because they had some knowledge, they were the wise men of old. They were the doctors also. And often just to show people how clever they were, they showed them some tricks to impose upon them. The people were very simple and ignorant, and considered the priests as magicians, and were frightened of them. The priests mixed with the life of the people in every way. They were the wise men, and everyone went to them when he was in trouble or was ill. They arranged big festivals for the people. There were no calendars in those days, especially for the common people. They counted by festivals. The priests often deluded and misled the people. But they helped them also in many ways, and made them progress. It is possible that in some places, when the people first settled down in towns, the people who governed them were priests and not kings. Later, the king came and displaced the priest as he could fight better. In some places the same person was king and priest, like the pharaohs in Egypt. Pharaohs indeed were considered half divine or half god even when alive. When they died, they were worshipped as gods. End of letter 25. In the next letter, Nehru slows down and recaps the previous letters.
On this channel, you will find well-researched information related to Nehru. I am Giribala Joshi.
Please press the like icon on my videos so that together we can spread factual historical information among more people.